Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into what I like to think of as a true biological colds case, using the fascinating research of Dr. Stephen Todd. We are tackling the absolute ultimate mystery. Why can't we live forever? I mean, what is physically happening inside our bodies as the years pass? And more importantly, why does nature even allow it to happen in the first place? Well, let's decode the science of getting older.
Okay, let's dive into this. Before we can actually solve the mystery, we need to define exactly what the aging process is biologically. You know, it's not just about getting a few wrinkles or gray hairs. It's really a progressive, generalized impairment of overall function. But the absolute critical part to remember is this. It results in the loss of your adaptive response to stress. Your body essentially loses its ability to bounce back from biological hurdles, which inevitably leads to a growing risk of age-related diseases.
And that brings us to a foundational, almost philosophical question, right? Why do we age? From a purely evolutionary standpoint, the answer is actually incredibly complex. So let's take a look at the very first major theory scientists considered.
For a really long time, the most intuitive answer was just the wear and tear theory. It basically views a living organism exactly like a complex machine. And what happens to machines? They simply wear out over time from constant use. Just think about the severe wear and tear on a wild elephant's teeth over its lifetime. Under this viewpoint, aging is just the inevitable price we pay for biological complexity. Eventually, moving parts just break down. And this brilliantly illustrates why wear and tear cannot be the whole answer. Nature throws us a massive biological plot twist. Consider the humble sea anemone. It literally does not biologically age at all. It's essentially immortal. And what about the salamander? It can regenerate entirely new, highly complex limbs if they're lost. If the whole machine wearing out theory was a strict universal law, these biological marvels simply shouldn't exist. These undeniable examples tell us that the ability to repair and maintain a body indefinitely is entirely possible in biology. So why don't humans have that ability?
That leads us right into what we can call the evolutionary paradox. Initially, scientists proposed the adaptive evolutionary theory. Basically, the idea that aging actually helps the species by clearing out the old to make room for the young. But there is a fatal flaw here. Evolutionary advantage works strictly at the individual level, not the population level. Plus, wild animals rarely live long enough to die of old age anyway. They usually succumb to predators or disease way before that. Because of this, scientific focus completely shifted to evolutionary senescence. And this is a real game changer. Because wild animals rarely reach old age, natural selection basically ignores late-life traits. It simply doesn't care what happens to you after you've safely reproduced. Because of this blind spot, detrimental genetic mutations that only trigger late in life are allowed to just quietly accumulate, and they get passed directly from generation to generation.
So the crucial point is how this exact blind spot plays out in our DNA, specifically through something called antagonistic pleiotropic genes. Now, these are genes that have a totally fascinating dual nature. In early life, they have a really positive effect. Maybe they make an organism highly fertile. Because they are so great for early reproduction, evolutionary pressures heavily retain them. But there's a severe late-life penalty. These exact same genes have a bad effect later on, contributing heavily to aging and eventually cell death, like P53 triggering apoptosis. A really great example from the research is the AA allele in fruit flies. This gene dramatically boosts early fertility, but it drastically reduces their overall longevity later on. Evolution basically just accepts the late-life damage in exchange for that early-life boost.
Okay, let's see how all this builds into one of the most compelling concepts here, the disposable soma theory. I want you to think of an organism's energy as a really strict financial budget. Every single living thing has a limited amount of energy it has to spend across different actions: finding food to fuel up, maintaining the body, reproducing, and defending against immediate threats. Every organism has to decide how to distribute this limited energy based on its specific environment. You simply cannot maximize everything. If you are forced to spend heavily in reproducing and immediate defense just to survive, your energy budget for somatic repair, which is the ongoing maintenance of your body, will absolutely suffer.
And, well, that brings us to a pretty humbling conclusion. Soma simply means the body, everything that isn't the germline or reproductive cells. And disposable means exactly what it sounds like, produced with a deliberately limited lifespan. According to the strict laws of thermodynamics, entropy, or natural disorder, always increases over time. We naturally decay. We try to resist this decay with defensive repair processes funded by our energy budget. But eventually, those protective mechanisms fail. Why? Because from a purely evolutionary standpoint, once you've successfully passed on your genes, your physical body, your soma, is entirely disposable to nature.
It's really just a temporary vehicle for your genes.
All right, so that beautifully explains the why, but it immediately begs the very next logical question. How do we actually age? Let's move away from the evolutionary philosophy for a second and zoom in on the literal cellular mechanics ticking away inside our bodies right now.
We can start by looking at system-level theories, specifically how our total body systems dictate the pace of aging. Take the neuroendocrine theory, for example. It suggests that aging is driven by a functional decrease in neurons and their associated hormones. Think about it. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis controls our incredible growth and development when we are young. So it makes total sense that this exact same network might eventually orchestrate our aging. We actually see this directly in aging rats, who experience really sharp drops in essential hormones like growth hormone and GnRH. Additionally, there's the rate of living theory. This points out a super straightforward biological correlation. Organisms with a higher basal metabolic rate generally have a shorter lifespan. It's almost as if running your biological engine hotter simply burns it out faster, accelerating the overall accumulation of damage.
But if we zoom in even further, past the total body systems, right down to the microscopic cellular level, we hit a strict, hardwired biological clock known as the Hayflick phenomena. This concept is absolutely foundational to understanding human aging. When human cells like fibroblasts are grown in a lab culture, they do not just divide forever. They undergo a set, highly predictable number of divisions, and then they just completely stop. Interestingly, if you take cells from a younger source, you actually get more divisions than if you take them from an older source. This has been repeated across so many different cell types, proving there is literally a hard replication limit ticking away inside us.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that we actually know what that physical countdown timer is. It's all about telomeres. Telomeres are these protective tails at the end of our chromosomes that stabilize them during cell division. Think of them kind of like the little plastic tips on the ends of your shoelaces. But every single time a cell divides, these telomeres physically shorten, snip by snip, division by division, until they are completely gone and the cell can no longer safely divide. But here's a mind-blowing and frankly somewhat terrifying biological exception. Tumor cells, along with our reproductive germ cells, produce a special enzyme called telomerase. This enzyme actively rebuilds the telomeres, allowing those specific cells to become practically immortal, completely bypassing the biological clock so they can divide endlessly. And alongside this microscopic countdown, our cells also suffer damage through cross-linkage. Over time, through processes like glycosylation, structural molecules like collagen literally stiffen up as their chemical bonds get all tangled together. So, at a cellular level, we are physically ticking down and stiffening up, all at the same time.
Which brings us to a really profound final realization from Dr. Todd's research. We are programmed to survive, not to age. Aging isn't some malicious software program intentionally installed in our DNA to destroy us. It's simply the biological shadow left behind by our aggressive evolutionary drive to survive just long enough to reproduce. We pour all of our genetic energy into the vital beginning of our lives, leaving our disposable bodies to face the inevitable wear and tear of time once our primary mission is totally complete. It completely reframes how we view growing old, doesn't it? It's not a failure of the body at all, but rather the ultimate consequence of a highly successful survival strategy. I really hope this explainer sheds some light on the incredible, intricate mechanics of your own biology. Keep questioning the world around you and, as always, stay curious.